of an opening statement for 5 minutes. I want to first thank the witnesses for joining us today for our hearing on water infrastructure financing through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, or thank God, WIFIA. Programs at the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers. Reliable water infrastructure is critical to safe, healthy, and secure communities. Under the jurisdiction of this subcommittee and through these programs, water infrastructure can mean many different things, such as wastewater treatment plants, which protect the public health and water quality, ports and navigational channels that enable the movement of goods nationwide, and levees and dams that safeguard communities from flooding, among others. This infrastructure may not be flashy, but the communities across Georgia and throughout the United States rely on it every single day. And building and maintaining it is neither a small or cheap undertaking. For example, some estimates have shown that hundreds of billions of dollars will be required to repair and replace clean water and wastewater infrastructure over the next 20 years. Those costs only swell when we account for other water infrastructure needs. The Clean Water SFR, or SRF, and the WIFIA programs provide financing, primarily in the form of low-interest loans for a wide range of water and wastewater projects. It is our responsibility to ensure that these programs are providing communities assistance to address their water infrastructure needs while also ensuring that the programs are managed in a financially responsible way so they can keep providing this assistance in the future. The Clean Water SRF has provided $172 billion through almost 50,000 low-interest loans to communities, mainly for wastewater infrastructure facilities and upgrades. For nearly 40 years, this program has functioned as a successful partnership between the federal government and states, where the states select projects to receive Clean Water SRF financing. On the other hand, the EPA and the WIFIA program and the Core Water Infrastructure Financing Program, also referred to as CWIFP, were authorized in 2014 and are administered on the federal level. While the EPA WIFIA program has closed 140 loans, CWIFP has not yet issued its first loan. CWIFP has struggled to get off the ground due to the variety of limitations placed on the program by our appropriations colleagues, as well as the Office of Management and Budget. As with all federal programs, there's always room for improvement to increase effectiveness and efficiency and to ultimately spend our taxpayer dollars more responsibly. Also want to note that for the Clean Water SRF and the WIFA programs to reach their full potential in assisting communities, we must also cut burdensome red tape and provide regulatory flexibility to the projects so that they get done faster. These are initiatives that I want to continue to work on this Congress and in partnership with the Trump administration, because a reasonably less restrictive regulatory environment will benefit all projects and programs as well as our economy. I'm looking forward to our hearing from our witnesses today, which will provide real-life perspectives on these water infrastructure financing programs, both the challenges and the successes. I now recognize the Ranking Member Wilson for 5 minutes for her opening statement.
Thank you so much, Chair Collins, for holding today's hearing on the critical issue of affordable investments in water infrastructure. This is my first time here as Ranking Member, and I'd like to take this opportunity to add my congratulations to your selection to lead this very important subcommittee, and I look forward to working with you as Ranking Member and working towards meeting the water needs of our nation, our communities, and the hard-working families that we represent. I'm privileged to represent Florida's 24th Congressional District in South Florida, a district known for its stunning beaches, crystal clear water, and vibrant outdoor lifestyle. Like much of Florida, our local economy is intertwined with the quality of our environment. Florida is a peninsula surrounded almost by water from head to toe. Clean water is the foundation of our region's environment, quality of life, and the approximately 1.2 million Florida jobs that depend on Florida's tourism. Our very existence depends on clean water for everyday consumption, commerce, recreation, and the economic vitality of the region. Not to mention that my community is ground zero for the climate crisis that our world faces. That is why I'm deeply concerned about the chaos that Republicans are creating with our clean water future. At the last committee hearing, witnesses from across the United States highlighted how the uncertainty caused by Republican funding freezes in water infrastructure financing is jeopardizing water projects across the nation. This situation is leading to project delays, escalating costs, and even the potential abandonment of crucial local water infrastructure projects. And the Republicans' response? Proposing more slashes to water infrastructure investments by at least 65%. These 1-2 punch to our nation's water infrastructure needs will directly hit the wallets of hard-working American families who will pay more in their water bills if that water is even available. The Republican-created chaos also undermines the roughly 28,000 jobs that are created for every $1 billion invested in water infrastructure, putting the jobs of laborers, manufacturers, and supply chains at risk. What is most chilling about all of this is that silence from my colleagues across the aisles, dead silence. Their constituents are equally concerned about the administration's actions to undermine our water supply. I truly hope that the Republican silence is not a green light for further slashes to protect our water supply. Our communities cannot withstand further setbacks to federal and state efforts to protecting our water and our environment. And we cannot allow this Republican administration to weigh down American families with higher cost and public health risks. I stand with our communities who are simply trying to affordably meet their local water needs. I yield back the balance of my time, and I look forward to hearing from the witnesses.
Thank you. I would now like to welcome our witnesses and thank them for being here today. We have Jeff Walker, who is former president of the Council of Infrastructure Financing Authorities, on behalf of the Council of Infrastructure Financing Authorities. Yeah. I'd also like to introduce our next witness, who is Chairman Tony Hillary of the Lumi Nation. I hope I pronounced that right. Is it? And I'd like to now introduce Mike Maticic. Did I get that right? Maticic. Yeah, I'm from the South, man. We don't get that far past Smith and Jones now. Economic and Finance Service Consulting Lead at Jacobs on behalf of the United States Chamber of Commerce, and Mr. Dan Buckley, Pre-construction executive, Mid-Atlantic, and with Garner Construction on behalf of the National Utility Contractors Association. I'm going to take a minute just to briefly explain our lighting system to the witnesses. If you notice, there's 3 lights in front of you. The green light is good to go. The yellow light means that you're running close on time, and the red light means to please conclude your remarks. I'll also ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Mr. Walker, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Collins, Ranking Member Wilson, members of the committee. Thank you for letting me testify on behalf of the Clean Water State Revolving Funds around the nation and the Council of Infrastructure Financing Authorities. My name is Jeff Walker. I serve as the Executive Director, Administrator of the Water Development Board, which manages all the SRFs in Texas. I've also served as President of CEFA, and the board has managed the SRF programs for over 30 years. The Clean Water SRFs around the nation asked me to deliver 4 messages today. First, the Clean Water SRFs love loans. Federally subsidized, low-interest loans are fiscally responsible investments that protect human health and environment. Affordable financing impacts the affordability of household wastewater bills today and in the future. There will always be need for some portion to be grants. However, loan repayments build a permanent, recurring source of revenue to continue to reinvest in the never-ending needs to build, rehabilitate, and modernize clean water infrastructure. Today, the Clean Water SRFs have $64 billion in permanently revolving loan funds, which is $12 billion more than the cumulative federal funding provided the programs. That's the power of loans over grants, perpetual, growing, and revolving. Many states are able to leverage their capitalization grants to increase their capacity for funding. However, the need is great. Leveraging in Texas allowed us to offer $482 million in funding capacity, but the intended use plan demand was $4.6 billion. So there are 1,500 new Texans every day, and none of them are bringing water or porta potties with them. So the need is great. Second, the Clean Water SRF loans save real money now and in the future. A low-interest SRF loan can cut the cost of financing by more than 50%, which directly impacts household wastewater bills. In 2024, the average interest rate for clean water loans was 1.9%, and there's a lot of variability in interest rates across the states. In Texas, our rates are based on the index to the bond market, but we also provide 0% loans to eligible small and rural disadvantaged communities for urgent need projects and also to develop asset management plans. This versatility and customization would be impossible with a one-size-fits-all program. Third, the Clean Water SRFs are effective because the programs are customized by states to meet the unique needs of the states and the communities they serve. States pick the projects, set interest rates, and determine eligibility for forgiveness and grants. Allowing states to customize is what makes the state SRS one of the most successful infrastructure funding programs in the nation's history. Because it's just common sense that what works in New York may not work in Georgia, and what works in Texas may not work in Wisconsin, and vice versa. Flexibility is custom to the key efficiency, cost-effective results. Which brings me to my final message. Congressional mandates on clean water SRF loans, no matter how well-intentioned, increase the cost of clean water financing, which may be borne by the families with higher water bills. More importantly, these mandates are just more process and paperwork, not necessarily more protection for public health. States should be responsible for the loan requirements that make sense to their borrowers and circumstances. For example, in Texas, we require SRF borrowers of $500,000 or more to create a water conservation and drought contingency plan, because these are very important state priorities. Other SRFs have different requirements, whatever is most relevant to that state and community. I distinctly remember a utility telling me once that this SRS were the most expensive, cheap money they'd ever had because of the paperwork and reporting requirements and all the mandates. The bottom line is that states are closer to communities and know their environmental challenges better than Washington, D.C., which makes our states better positioned to effectively address these challenges. The most valuable role in Congress and the federal government can play is to support states in funding and flexibility, which will get the best results for the American citizens and taxpayers. I want to remind you, too, that these capitalization grants are not EPA grants. They're the states, come straight to the states, and the states decide how to use those. I want to thank the chair and ranking members for the opportunity to share the thoughts of Clean Water SRFs, and I look forward to any questions you may have in discussion.
Thank you. I'd now like to recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, to introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really honored to introduce Tony Hilaire, who's the chair of the Lummi Nation in Northwest Washington State. So the Pacific Northwest is defined by its clean water, including the health of the Puget Sound, the Salish Sea, the Nooksack River, and surrounding rivers, streams, and lakes. Native peoples were the first to recognize and respect the importance of these critical natural resources and their inhabitants, including salmon and orcas, for current and future generations. I look forward to hearing the Lummi Nation's perspective today on the importance of clean water and water infrastructure needs of tribal and rural communities. Chair Hilaire is currently serving his third consecutive year as chairman of the Lummi Indian Business Council. I'd also note that when I was first elected, Tony's father, Daryl, was the chair of the, he can't get rid of me and I can't get rid of the Hilaires. So as a lifelong resident of Lummi and Bellingham, Washington, Chair Hilaire has continued his family's dedication to uplifting their community, ensuring that the tribe is at the table, their voices are heard, and they're fighting to secure funding needed for their people. I want to recognize his leadership as well on addressing the ongoing opioid epidemic, both regionally and nationally, and the important work that we've done together to combat this problem. When he's not busy with his duties as a chair, he's a lifelong commercial fisherman as well. I think it's safe to say he'd probably rather be out fishing today than testifying before Congress, but I'm glad he made the trip. I raise my hands to the Lummi Nation for their work they've done and will continue to do for their community and Northwest Washington, and we look forward to your testimony.
Chairman Collins, Ranking Member Wilson, Chairman Graves, and Ranking Member Larson. It's an honor and a privilege to testify here before this distinguished subcommittee to discuss water infrastructure. Ait squachil nastalach siam, and that means in Lummi language, good morning, my dear friends and relatives. My name is Satsumton, my name is Tony Hilaire, and I am the chairman of the Lummi Nation. In 1855, our ancestors signed the Point Elliott Treaty, where we left vast lands to the United States in exchange for a reservation and the guarantee that we could continue to hunt and fish and gather in our usual and accustomed areas. Our right to health care, our right to education, our right to be Lummi and continue our way of life. This is a shared history, a peace treaty between the Lummi Nation and the United States of America, which means we are bound to each other and carry responsibility to follow through on these obligations. And since time immemorial, the Lummi people have depended on water. It is more than a resource, it is life itself. It sustains our culture, our identity, our economy, and our treaty rights. The health of our waters directly affects the health of our people, our salmon runs, and our shellfish beds, and we identify as the salmon people. The health and well-being of the Lummi people is undeniably bound to the health and well-being of the salmon, and thus it is also bound to the clean and sustainable waters that they depend on. Unfortunately, throughout our history, we continue to face significant challenges in maintaining wastewater treatment systems that ensure safe drinking water and ensure the protection of waters that sustain our treaty reserved resources. When pollution or failing infrastructure forces our shellfish beds to close, it doesn't just impact the tribe, it shuts down an economic engine that supports both tribal and non-tribal fishermen, local businesses, and food supply chains. Clean water isn't just about protecting the environment, it's about protecting jobs, sustaining economies, and upholding treaty rights. Wastewater systems at Lummi have been outdated and over capacity, and for 6 years, our Gooseberry Point wastewater treatment plant operated beyond its limits, discharging inadequately treated water. And fixing this problem was not easy. It took more than 6 years to secure funding and complete the project, with construction itself lasting 2 years and 8 months. And the total project cost reached about $18.7 million, and of this, $12.9 million came from grants or forgivable loans, with the remainder, $5.7 million, financed through our state revolving fund. While the Gooseberry Improvement Project was a major step forward, it is only part of the broader infrastructure crisis that we face. The Lummi Tribal Water and Sewer District operates a system that has components dating back since before 1970. And since 1979, the system has been expanded piece by piece, leaving us with aging and inefficient infrastructure in dire need of a complete overhaul. We serve over 6,000 residents, both Indian and non-Indian, operating 9 wells, 4 potable water storage sites, and 3 wastewater treatment plants. Saltwater intrusion threatens our water supply. Private wells operate unregulated, and every summer we struggle to meet demand, forcing us to purchase off-reservation water. We have multiple pressing water and sewer projects requiring about $50 million in federal investment, and we have identified another $46 million in potential needs. These challenges are not unique to us. Tribal and rural communities across the country face similar infrastructure shortfalls. And while the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provided a much-needed boost, it is only a fraction of the need. Of the $43 billion allotted nationally for drinking water and wastewater from fiscal year 22 to 26, about $868 million was set aside for tribes. And we thank you for this funding and are very grateful, but it does pale in comparison to the overall need. And I would like to emphasize that even when funding exists, tribes face unnecessary barriers in accessing it. The federal funding system is overly complex and fragmented, requiring tribes to navigate multiple agencies, each with different eligibility criteria, applications, and reporting requirements. And this bureaucracy discourages many tribes from applying and exacerbates the infrastructure disparities. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to listen to us. We urge Congress to provide direct investments and tribal set-asides and reduce bureaucratic barriers to support long-term water security, health, and economic prosperity. Haishka, thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Buckley, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Chairman, ranking member, and distinguished members of this committee, thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the state of America's water infrastructure and the role of the American utility construction industry. My name is Dan Buckley.
Mr. Buckley, could you pull the microphone a little bit closer to you? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Dan Buckley, and I'm honored to address you as a lifelong professional in this field. I'm a former chairman of the National Utility Contractors Association, as a representative of an industry that serves the backbone of our nation, and an employee owner with Garney Construction. We build and maintain the water and wastewater systems that keep our civilization running. Our work is buried, often out of sight and out of mind. Without us, the foundation of American life as we know it would crumble. Our philosophy is simple. Without the water infrastructure we build and maintain, civilization as we know it would not exist. The utility construction industry is a diverse network of skilled workers, engineers, small business owners, and large firms, united by a singular mission: to deliver clean water to every American in business. Contributing billions to the economy, our industry workforce spans urban and rural communities alike. Many are small, family-owned businesses. The projects we undertake are costly, requiring local, state, and federal coordination. For decades, the primary engine driving these projects has been the EPA State Revolving Fund, SRF, providing low-interest loans and grants to states and municipalities. The SRF has worked remarkably well in channeling federal support into local projects, keeping America's water systems operational. The WIFIA program has expanded access to financing for communities across the country. We call on Congress to build on the program's successes by reauthorizing WIFIA and the State Infrastructure Financing Authority programs alongside the SRFs. The SRF's largest fault remains, however, the lack of resources provided each fiscal year. Given enormous scope of the repairs and upgrades of our current water infrastructure demands, not enough makes it into appropriations discussions or into final law. The resources allocated by the SRF by Congress have never fully matched the scope of the problem. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that the United States needs to invest $1 trillion over the next 25 years to maintain and upgrade our drinking water and wastewater systems. Yet, annual SRF funding has hovered only in the $2 to $5 billion range, not nearly enough to address the backlog of projects waiting in the queue. Historically, federal funding covered 63 to 75% of water infrastructure costs. Today, it's just 4% pre-IIJA. Today's SRFs and WIFIA programs are vital resources with Band-Aid budgets. Compounding this issue, congressional earmarks sometimes divert funds from SRF's core mission, prioritizing political projects over state-led priorities, leaving critical repairs unfunded. In recent years, deep cuts to EPA's budget have been proposed, with the bulk of those cuts coming directly from the SRF programs. Annual funding for the SRFs has remained static for the last 7 years. Please keep in mind, we're talking about funding clean water. Let me be clear, the EPA's Office of Water does an exceptional job administering these programs under difficult circumstances. We urge Congress to protect and provide more resources as broader EPA reforms are considered. At the same time, states need better training and education for grant administrators to streamline the process. Every hour of the day, leaks and breaks waste an estimated 6 billion gallons of treated drinking water. That's over 2 trillion gallons of water per year. Treated water goes to waste, and untreated wastewater seeps into the ground. Recent long-term water supply crises in Jackson, Mississippi, Asheville, North Carolina, Richmond, Virginia have highlighted this national predicament, and there are more of them in the months ahead coming. With clean water and sanitary systems, disease spreads. Without them, disease spreads, economies falter, communities suffer, and our quality of life erodes. First, let's increase the investment. NUCA estimates, as Ranking Member Wilson stated earlier, that for every $1 billion invested in water infrastructure, over 28,000 jobs are created. Those are American jobs that will stay here in the United States. That'll add $4.5 trillion to the GDP over the next 20 years. Second, Congress needs to reform earmarks for water infrastructure. Earmarks are cutting into the ability for us to provide equitable funding for water and wastewater. I see my time is running limited, so the last thing I'm going to say is let's look at private activity bonds. Reforms would incentivize private capital to flow into water projects, supplementing public funds and accelerating repairs. By lifting outdated caps, Congress can harness the power of the private sector to complement the SRF system. Transportation and infrastructure projects currently utilize PABs without caps in P3s throughout the nation. Why can't we lift the cap that is on water and wastewater projects similar to what is done on transportation? The legislative fix would give our industry additional access to capital not funded through Congress. So with that, I thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Matidich, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Collins, ranking members Larson and Wilson, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Mike Matidich, and I'm a global principal for economic and financial services at Jacobs Solutions. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today as you examine the WIFIA and Clean Water SRF programs. I would also like to thank the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for their leadership and for helping to make my testimony possible. We like to say at Jacobs that we're challenging today to reinvent tomorrow by solving the world's most critical problems, and addressing the multitude of challenges to our aging water infrastructure has never been more complex. As one of America's leading consulting advisory firms, Jacobs is proud to support communities in implementing affordable financing strategies that provide safe and clean water for their citizens. My career to date has provided me the opportunity to work as an economic and financial planning consultant to the water industry for more than 40 years. Over that time, I have focused much of my attention on helping water, sewer, and stormwater utilities develop strategic, implementable financing plans for their capital programs while keeping rates affordable. We at Jacobs and the communities we serve are deeply grateful for the continued commitment from Congress to fund federal water infrastructure programs. Investments into the Clean Water SRF and WIFIA programs are crucial tools for states, tribes, and localities to address growing capital investment and capacity gaps and rising affordability challenges. Since the start of the WIFIA program, I have observed some important innovations that have helped that contributed to the program's success. I'd like to highlight a few of those. First is the combination of projects. Initially, EPA required separate applications for each unique project. Changes were made to allow multiple projects to be combined into a combination of projects application, and this has provided real efficiencies both for applicants and for EPA in administering the program. Second is the master agreement. A few years ago, EPA added the opportunity to request a master agreement under which separate tranches of loans with 5-year implementation schedules could be negotiated, and this has enabled applicants with longer-term capital programs to receive assured funding for those projects. And third was the opportunity to renegotiate rates. WIFIA's flexible terms have cost-saving benefits to communities. When interest rates dropped in 2020, EPA allowed loan awardees to renegotiate their terms. This option remains important because it gives applicants flexibility if the interest rate environment becomes more favorable. As of last year, 11 loan holders took advantage of that opportunity to renegotiate rates and saved an estimated $1.5 billion in reduced interest costs. Even though the WIFIA program has provided some flexibility for small communities, interest in WIFIA by small communities has been limited. Small systems face higher costs per customer than large systems because they don't have the same scale economies. And as a result, even with the flexible financing terms by the WIFIA program, customer affordability remains a challenge for small systems. We believe further refinement to the WIFIA and Clean Water SRF programs can improve their access by small systems and strengthen the long-term capacity of communities. First, offering small systems a subsidized interest rate such as 2/3 of the U.S. Treasury rate would make WIFIA financing more accessible. This would also more closely mirror the consideration given to small systems in the SRF programs. Second, expanding pre-construction financing opportunities enables water systems to demonstrate readiness for construction faster, thereby improving their access to the SRFs, WIFIA, or other financing opportunities. Lastly, technical assistance by EPA's environmental finance centers are crucial to improving the capacity development of water systems and allowing seamless delivery of projects from inception to completion. I'll conclude by saying that the backlog of critical infrastructure needs continues to be an urgent national priority. These programs are vital to improving public health and promoting economic growth. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 3 statements. First, a statement from the American Society of Civil Engineers. Second, a statement from the National Association of Clean Water Agencies. And third, a statement from the Associated General Contractors of America. Without objection, so ordered. Thank you all for providing your testimony. We will now turn to questions for the panel, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. You know, before I ask questions, I kind of like to give a little bit of background about myself. I'm a sophomore up here, second Congress serving. And I like to tell people I've spent 30+ years in the private sector, either starting small businesses or buying small businesses or running them. And when I go into a hearing, I always think about 3 things. And that is, what's the problem, what's the solutions, and how do we fix things so that they never happen again? The other thing I like to listen to are what are the successes that are going right so that we don't mess that up. And so as you give your answers to the questions, I would kind of keep that in mind as to the path that I like to take. The Clean Water SRF program and and I got this right now, the WIFIA program provides significant federal investment for our water infrastructure projects. Increasing the efficiency of these programs will benefit communities across the country by reducing bureaucratic red tape and supporting faster project completion. Now, going down the line with each of you, I would like for you just to, can you provide 1 or 2 suggestions? And that's based on what your experience is. on ways to improve the efficiency of the Clean Water SRF and/or the EPA's WIFIA program. And we'll start with Mr. Walker.
Okay, thank you, sir. One of the ways, like I mentioned in my testimony, is to reduce the number of mandates, especially for small communities. There are 7,000 water systems in Texas, most of them under 500 connections, and assuming they can handle all these mandates and the reporting is not a good thing. They just can't do it. It takes a lot of work. Texas is just now starting to use WIFIA. One of the problems with it that I've heard, it's really for bigger communities. I mean, the application fee is $100,000 off the bat, and it's non-refundable. So small communities can't afford that. Plus, the small communities has to pay the consulting fees for EPA. And it can only be 49% of the project. So they got to find another 51% of the project, which is usually the SRFs. So that's kind of applying two different places. It's not really good for small. It works great for a large, sophisticated community, but it's really not good for small communities.
Thank you. Honorable Hillier.
Yeah, thank you for that question, and I really appreciate and admire your mindset in coming into these subcommittees. For us, generally speaking, for solutions and thinking about what some of the barriers are, for us it's direct funding, and and in forms of grants as well, tribal set-asides, and also just streamlined applications and reporting requirements would go a long way for us. However that looks, and whatever that can be is something that would be beneficial and a good solution, because right now we have to go through so many different hurdles of these requirements, not just local, but state and federal, and then also trying to go through our own code of laws at Lummi Nation. It can be strenuous on our team just to compile and gather the funding. So as a solution, I think that's what we're looking for, something a little more direct and immediate to address the immediate need.
Thank you. Mr. Buckley?
I'd have to rely on our utility owners to answer this a little bit more directly, but I do see the downwind of a lot of strings that are attached to grants when they come through the SRF's programs. I think creating the loan applications are fairly straightforward, but the grant applications can be extremely tedious, and the people that need, or the end users that actually need the grants the most, are the smaller utilities that we service, and they don't have the personnel or resources to actually do grant writing. It's a little bit difficult for them to get that accomplished. So I think the strings attached to grants and the list of requirements that are needed on grants is just too great.
Thank you. Mr. Matidich?
Yes, thank you. I would suggest on the WIFIA side that more widespread use of the master agreement mechanism that I mentioned in my testimony, where through a single letter of interest and application, you can get an approval for a multi-year, like 10-year or 15-year period. More widespread use of that mechanism would reduce some of the application requirements and bureaucracy. And on the SRF side, the equivalent is programmatic financing. And some states offer programmatic finance, but not all states do. So more widespread use of programmatic financing in the SRF program, I think, could also accomplish some important efficiencies.
Thank you. I see that my time is up, so we'll recognize the Ranking Member Wilson now for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to welcome the witnesses to the Water Resource and Environment Subcommittee. We're here to discuss water infrastructure financing, specifically the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, or WIFIA, and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. They ensure our communities have properly functioning wastewater infrastructure and support efforts in every corner of the country. They allow us to invest in our nation's water infrastructure, funding projects ranging in sizes from as small as $50,000 to millions of dollars. My South Florida community received $147 million WIFIA loan to increase the reliability of our drinking water supply. My mantra has always been jobs, 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 and this project in South Florida will deliver countless jobs across both Miami-Dade County and the Florida Keys. It will also help deliver clean water to roughly 150,000 Floridians. In 2019, we saw Miami-Dade County receive a $100 million loan. These investments in Florida are critical. My district includes the entire water coastline, Biscayne Bay, and some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. Water is not just near to us, it is the lifeblood of our community. It supports our tourism, sports, fishing, cruise lines, and cargo ships. So I'm grateful for the work of this committee and what they're doing with the Water Resource Development Act of 2026. With that, I have a question for the panel. I want to start with Chairman Hilaire. As Congress consider both reauthorization and funding of the Clean SRF, do you support maintaining the funding levels of the last 4 years of BIL funding for the SRF program over the next 5 years? And with cutting the Clean Water SRF program by over 65% have an adverse impact on meeting the clean water infrastructure needs of our community, especially our small, rural, and economically disadvantaged communities. If these federal funds were eliminated, what would happen to local water and sewer bills? If these critical upgrades were even possible to carry out with diminished funding, would taxpayers and ratepayers have to pay more? Start with Mr. Hilaire and then everyone. Take a turn.
Thank
I'll
you.
get into it in a minute.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. First off, maintaining a robust annual investment is very important to the Lummi people. We depend on this, and our habitat depends on this, and our salmon and shellfish beds depend on it. And being a fishing people, the continued decline of our ability to fish has significant impacts to the well-being of our people as well. So when we talk about these financial investments and the being a small and tribal community and participating in these infrastructure investment programs, it can definitely be an issue because it puts us in a place of trying to maintain that break even and also not try to raise the rates for our people that are getting water from our wastewater treatment plant. And we have high rates of poverty and inability to practice our treaty reserved rights, and there's just a great need for us, and you know, it's a tough position to be in, and as Ranking Member Larson mentioned, he's survived generations of Lummi leadership, and if he wants to come back to Lummi and tell our elders that we're turning off their water, he's more than welcome to join me. But right now, we're any way that we can do this in a productive and affordable way is probably the utmost importance to us, and I think grants or direct funding would be great ways to do this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. So as the chairman mentioned a while ago, the CAP grants have been static, if not dropping, because of congressional mandates and earmarks. But meanwhile, as y'all already know, and our other members here, the costs have increased dramatically. So I'm thinking that we can continue to lower the CAP grants, money to the states, and eventually to the citizens without, and meet our needs, we can't do that. I mean, we've got to at least fund the full authorization, not appropriation, so.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Mr. Chair, I'd like to enter into the record 2 letters, American Rivers and 37 national and state organizations about future federal funding.
So ordered. All right, the chair now recognizes Member Boss for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, in February, I introduced legislation that would actually amend the WIFIA to modernize the program to ensure all projects receive program assistance are met with payment and performance bonding requirements. While some projects already have these bonding requirements, newer forms of project deployment, such as public-private partnerships, could leave taxpayers and funds and payments to subcontractors at risk. Having these security protections in place guarantees subcontractors, suppliers, and workers on our nation's infrastructure projects are paid and projects are complete on time and on budget, even if the lead contractor has financial issues. Yeah, my question is to the panel, and if you could answer very quickly, got a second question I need to get to. Do you think that all of these projects if they meet the bonding requirements to protect on-site workers and safeguards and federal tax dollars? Is this a good idea?
In Texas, we require bonding of all contractors, so yes, it's a good idea. We've had projects that failed and they got to, with the bonding, they've continued to supply the services, so yes.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with this type of program assistance, so I would like to yield my time to the other.
Yes, sir. In the construction industry, we're well aware of the bonding abilities and needs of our subcontractors base. So, yeah, we support.
Mr. Mitchell?
I believe that is an important, consideration, and we support that as well.
I appreciate that. In Southern Illinois, where I'm from, many of my local communities have been looking for help with water infrastructure projects. Unfortunately, it can be difficult to assist some constituents who receive their water through privately owned water utility and companies. Last Congress, I introduced legislation with my colleague from California, Mr. Derek Garamundi, titled the Clean Water SRF Parity Act. Now, what this bill would allow is investor-owned wastewater utilities to apply for low-interest loans through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, just as they are allowed to do under the Drinking Water SRF. Importantly, our legislation would only allow them to compete for loans when the state thinks it is appropriate. At the same time, it ensures that the benefits of these loans is only passed directly to our constituents and ratepayers. Mr. Walker, the CIFA has supported this legislation in the past, and as I prepare to reintroduce the bill in the 119th Congress, could you explain the benefits of allowing private wastewater utilities access to some of these loans?
Like you said, CIFA is not opposed to this. I mean, a lot of states, a lot of their constituents are supplied by these privates, so allowing that, we have no problem with that.
Okay, do you currently believe that currently enabling of private wastewater companies to apply for these loans, interest loans, has hurt taxpayers who are hard-earned dollars to the SRF by denying access simply because where they live?
I agree. Sometimes they don't have a choice of who supplies their services, so yes, sir.
All right. Mr. Mitchell, can you please speak about how opening the SRF loan program to private water companies would benefit not only the end user, but also strengthening the loan program over time?
I believe that that given the significant backlog of infrastructure needs, it's critical for there to be a variety of options and opportunities for support to finance the programs. And on the drinking water side, having access to the SRF programs. I've observed situations where it's been, critical to supporting the opportunity for all customers in a state to have access to low-income interest financing for their projects. And I think that there's maybe some additional evaluation that needs to be done, but believe that increasing access to low-interest loans for a wider share of the U.S. population service areas is important.
Thank you. My time has expired, and I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair Hilaire, in your testimony, you talked about I think you mentioned 4 specific federal agencies that you might have to work with at any one time in order to accomplish a financing package. You mentioned IHS, you mentioned BLM, presumably EPA, and a fourth. Do you have specific ideas about how to get, whether it's those 4 or any mix of agencies all on the same page to ensure that the bureaucracy that a small water purveyor like yourself or other rural communities changes you could make to make it easier for you all?
Yeah, thank you. There's a few things, but I think mainly a streamlining process for water projects and expand these regulatory streamlining efforts that cover tribal water infrastructure projects. And just like the state revolving fund, it took us, as I mentioned, took us 6 years to piece together the necessary funding from multiple sources, grants, forgivable loans, and SRF financing. But it helped, but loan-based programs alone are not a practical solution for many of us tribes, which is why more direct investment and other grant opportunities are critical to the future water infrastructure projects at Lummi. And that's just one example, but I think the main overall issue here is all the different hoops we have to jump through just to get funding that we need, and then the reporting requirements on top of it. It's very strenuous.
Could you speak a little bit to any tribes that you've worked with or come in contact with that, say, aren't on the Salish Sea or aren't on a river or somewhere near water, and the challenges they have with SRF funding or with building appropriate water and wastewater infrastructure?
Yeah, well, just briefly speaking, it was already mentioned for a lot of water users in rural communities and tribes, there's no choice. I mean, there's no other option, and that can be a big hurdle for us. We're fortunate that we had tribal leaders of the past that ensured that we would have our water rights on reservation and ensure that we had our own infrastructure for the Lummi people, but that's not the case across Indian country, and so I can't think of any particular tribal nation, but I do know it is an issue across the country.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Buckley, you mentioned private activity bonds and what we did in transportation. Could you just remind us what we did with road, bridges, highways, infrastructure, and how that might relate?
Sure. So if you look at public-private partnerships that was just mentioned by Member Ross, private activity bonds allows the private industry to come in and participate in rebuilding our water infrastructure. Right now, there are caps listed on water and wastewater. There aren't caps on roadway and highway PABs. So you're pretty much unlimited. So that allows a lot of the P3s that you've seen circling the Beltway here in DC that are all P3 driven. We're looking for that in the water business. If we have a hindrance or the inability for us to get funding through Congress, open it up to private, just like we have with our transportation system. Caps right now They all vary, but it could be 3 million or 5 million. It's going to be hard to find an investor to come in with 3 or 5 million, but it'd be a lot easier for an investor to come in with 50 or 100 million. They could see some benefit from their, from that return. And again, what we're talking about is rebuilding a failing infrastructure. So we need to open up all alternatives on financing and sources to get this done. Clean water is not clean anymore, and we need to fix that.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, glasses. Manicic, Mr. Manicic. So the administration and the EPA has proposed, or has said, I guess, they want a 65% cut in the EPA. Now, if that was across the board in the EPA as opposed to targeted, that would mean really a devastating cut to money available for the SRF. Is that how the money works?
To date, I haven't observed any impacts from
It's only been announced or discussed. So Congress has a say in this, but what would a 65% cut mean? Maybe with respect to the chairman, why don't you answer that question for the record and get that back to us, and we'll get you a specific question written so you can get back to us specifically on it. Got it?
Yes.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Fong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for having this hearing. Look forward to working with you. If I could ask Mr. Walker, and anyone can chime in here, but for us in California, we've got large-scale water storage projects that we're trying to get to the finish line, whether it's Sites Reservoir, San Luis Reservoir, the Frank Kern Canal. In your opinion, in terms of just the WIFIA loan program, what steps can be taken to make these loans more accessible to large-scale water storage projects in California? And are there any clarifying or expanding eligibility, rules that we need to examine to secure WIFIA funding for these projects?
I don't know. I applaud California. They're doing some really innovative work out there. And as being a Texan, it's hard for me to say. But y'all have done a very good job, especially with your direct potable and indirect potable and reusing water in a great way. Like I said, I'm not that familiar with WIFIA, but if they allowed more innovative projects like that through financing and maybe even more of the total project cost, because WIFIA only allows 49%, so that's still a large chunk you've got to find somewhere else. And the SRFs are geared toward fixing broken systems versus being innovative and long-term water systems. So maybe that's a way to do that.
Okay. Does anyone have any other, advice here or guidance in terms of how we allow WIFIA loans to be accessible to large-scale water storage projects?
Yes, sir. So we have performed some state revolving funds and WIFIA work in California. I think it was the Carbon Canyon Water Recycling Facility. And yeah, again, it's getting the binds off us when it comes to, and the strings attached that are tied to some of the funding. And also in the smaller communities, we need to make it a more streamlined process for them, easier. They don't have the staff and the personnel to do grant writing and things along those lines, and it's a hindrance to them. And they're the ones that need the water the most, or the funding the most.
Okay. I mean, this may be something that we have to kind of look at more intently. I think that for us in California, we've just got large-scale projects that probably need some clarification. In terms of Mr. Maticic, if I could ask you, you've kind of discussed, you mentioned the 35-year terms as an example of a financing advantage of the WIFIA loan program. Some have suggested a 55-year term that would help, more communities access loan funding. Can you describe how extending, loan maturity dates, how that would provide greater flexibility for some of these long-term projects?
Yes, Congressman Fong, I'm happy to do that. The WIFIA program allows not only a 5-year construction period, but then within that 35-year repayment period, there's an opportunity to delay repayment for an additional 5 years. And so you can have the equivalent of a 30-year loan, but 10 years before you have to start paying it back. And what that allows communities to do is to ramp up into the rate increases and fee increases that are needed, and that provides a tremendously important flexibility, along with the ability to structure the loan. The WIFIA finance team, essentially works with the applicants to sculpt the debt service in a manner that meets their needs and that fits with other debt that they may have. If, for example, the 51% matching share is coming from revenue bonds, then the WIFIA repayment can be sculpted to fit around the revenue bond repayment.
Oh, thank you. And then my last question, Mr. Buckley, I certainly agree with you. Many communities need assistance, especially rural communities. I've got communities in my district that are not only rural, but they're also relatively isolated. In the WIFIA Reauthorization Act introduced late last Congress, there was a proposal to lower the minimum threshold project size under $1 million. How would lowering this rate to make programs more accessible to rural areas allow for greater expansion of the WIFIA loan program?
Well, I think when you're talking about lowering the rate, you're talking about making a project a go or a no-go. It's going to make it either affordable or not affordable for the utility. So less to pay back, yeah, I think it would support it in a great way. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Gillen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am honored to represent the South Shore of Long Island in New York's 4th Congressional District. My district sadly suffers from legacy water contamination, aging infrastructure, and unacceptable water quality issues that requires the aid of the federal government. The village of Hempstead lies in my district and relies on a plant that is more than 100 years old. It's one of the oldest water plants in our region. Last year, Hempstead officials found out that there were alarming levels of toxic carcinogens and PFAS chemicals in their drinking water. They called for desperately needed help to fund the construction of a new water system. Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to enter this May 2024 article titled "Hempstead Drinking Water Said to Contain High Levels of Cancer-Causing Chemicals" into the record.
So ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I ask every member of this committee to look at the amazing women you see right next to me right here. This woman, Mary Florence Purdy, is a lifelong resident of Hempstead, a mother, a grandmother, and even a great-grandmother. And I'm so honored to represent Ms. Purdy in Congress. For many years, Ms. Purdy noticed that a lot of her neighbors were developing many different kinds of cancer, and she noticed that the water that she saw in her home was funny looking and troubling looking. This is a good day of the water that comes into her home. She's realized that the cause may be the carcinogens that were in the water supply in Hempstead. As you know, PFAS contains carcinogens that cause serious health problems, including links to cancer, liver damage, immune system disorders. And my constituents and Americans across our country should not be subjected to these cancer-causing chemicals in their water supply and every time they turn on the faucet in their home. So knowledge of these carcinogens in the water activated the activist in Ms. Purdy, and she decided that she was going to do something about it. She said she never ever had gone to any government hearing before in her life, but she went before the Nassau County Legislature and begged for their help to clean up the water in Hempstead. And she said, if no one's gonna help me, I'll do it myself. I'm an old lady, and I have no business walking all over the village of Hempstead, but I'll do whatever it takes to make sure the residents here get clean water. And so she did. She went to barber shops, she went to supermarkets, she went to gas stations, she recruited friends from her senior citizen club to go walk around the village of Hempstead with her, making sure she had someone who was fluent in Spanish so everybody could understand what was going on with the water there. And she said no one said no. I met Ms. Purdy when I was at a meet and greet in my district during the summer, and she gave me hundreds and hundreds of signatures on a petition that she carried herself, a 74-year-old lady, asking for help to get clean water in Hempstead. I promised her that if I got to Congress, I would advocate to make sure that every resident of Hempstead and our country has access to clean water. It shouldn't matter where you live, whether or not you get clean, cancer-free water. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm here today as a member of this subcommittee because of Ms. Mary Purdy and every single resident of my district who deserves access to clean water that has been neglected in some way by their government. Thanks to the hard work of Ms. Purdy, of the village mayor, the deputy mayor, and the trustees, the village of Hempstead received $1.7 million in federal aid to help break ground on a new water treatment facility, and received money also from the state of New York to continue building it. While this money has been helpful and is critical, it does not go far enough. The project will cost up to $55 million to complete. Communities like Hempstead need federal funding so the water my constituents use to bathe, clean, and drink is safe. The bipartisan infrastructure law included $11.7 billion for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, including $1 billion specifically dedicated to addressing emerging contaminant like PFAS, but it's not enough. Mr. Matich, can you speak briefly to what more we can do to make sure Congress is providing the federal resources directly to communities like Hempstead to upgrade critical water infrastructure?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I appreciate your question. I mean, as I've said in my pre-filed testimony, the existing commitments through the SRF programs and through the WIFIA program, that are especially the bipartisan infrastructure law, the higher levels have been tremendously important, but as you indicated, do not come anywhere close to fully funding the backlog of critical infrastructure needs. I know that these programs have bipartisan support because they're critical to customers and users of water systems like your constituent throughout the entire country, and increasing the level of opportunity for low interest loans, and where possible, some of the principal forgiveness funding that you referenced, I think are critical, and increases are every dollar of increase that can be
Gillen,
approved is money well spent.
I would suggest that you follow up with a written answer
Yes.
for you, so we've got a lot of people. and
Thank
we're
you,
over.
thank you, Chairman. I yield my time back. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you. The chair now recognizes the vice chair of the subcommittee, Mr. Taylor, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Collins and Ranking Member Wilson, for holding this hearing today, and thank you to our witnesses for their testimony and insight. I represent a rural district which has a significant amount of aging water infrastructure. Most of the cities and towns in my district have water infrastructure that has well exceeded its intended lifespan, which is unacceptable. I'm excited to work with members of this committee to ensure our nation's water infrastructure is safe and resilient. There's often a lengthy backlog of projects awaiting state revolving fund awards, with some projects taking years to receive funding. With aging infrastructure well past its intended lifespan, many of these projects cannot last years without incident. Earlier this year in the town of Waverly, Ohio, in my district, there was a water leak that caused water to be shut off and a boil advisory for over a week, and they had 8 different water main breaks within a 1-year period there. Disruptions like this shouldn't happen in the United States in 2025. What practices and policies does Congress need to enact to ensure that water infrastructure nearing the end of its intended lifespan receives funding so Americans have access to safe and healthy water? And I'll open that up to whoever wants to jump on it first.
I'll take the first thing. Like you said, Texas has a lot of rural systems just like you do. One of the problems with the drinking water SRF is that it's geared toward compliance issues, not necessarily leaks and breaks, which are very important. And some communities will never get to the top of the list. Like I said, we had $4 billion of demand, we had $400 million to deliver. So maybe allowing the states a little more leeway in what is more important to them as far as funding, so they can concentrate instead of what EPA decides what's more important.
Anyone with anything to add to that?
I would just say, look at the funding levels. Look at what clean water is actually receiving compared to other areas within our T&I community. Transportation receives a ton of funding. Broadband receives more than water. And we sit there, well, COVID taught us we can live without our roadways for a short period of time. We can live without broadband, but try living one day without water.
Good point. There have been continuous discussions on whether the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which provides low-interest loans to rural cities for projects, should be issued as a federal grant instead of a federal loan. Based on my research, keeping the State Revolving Fund as a federal loan lowers utility bills for customers and provides additional funding for other water projects across the United States. Mr. Walker, can you elaborate on additional benefits of keeping the Clean Water State Revolving Fund as a low-interest loan compared to a grant?
Yes, sir, and in fact, that's one of the beauties of the SRF. You give me a $50 million grant, and I give away $50 million, that's it. But I can turn that $50 million into $300 million or $400 million and it will revolve back and forth by leveraging. So that's the beauty of the subsidized loans.
Are there any drawbacks to the rural communities themselves if our SRF projects were awarded as a grant?
Most of the times, the cost of projects now is so large that there's not enough grant money in the world to deliver all those things. And we do a good job of making packages that make it more affordable, and spreading that out is a lot better too. Some of the rural communities cannot afford anything, unfortunately. And so you have to find, there is a need for loan grants, but as a whole, most of them can afford something, it's just that they don't want to sometimes.
Thank you. Everyone can agree that many of the procedures and processes the federal government requires when determining a water project can be tiresome, oftentimes unnecessary and costly. These burdensome processes are especially hard on rural America, where communities don't have resources to complete the applications even. Mr. Maticic, in your testimony, you mentioned how steps were taken in the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act that have helped streamline the process. Are there any other areas in the Clean Water Act, specifically WIFIA, that Congress needs to look at to further streamline the process and help deliver these crucial projects?
Thank you for that question, Congressman Taylor. I believe that there are opportunities to provide technical assistance that can maybe be very useful to some of the rural and smaller community applicants that you've referenced. I believe in terms of the bureaucratic and application processes, that encouraging more applicants to use that combination of projects where you can roll multiple projects into a single application, or the master agreement where you can have a long-term program, or on the SRF level could have programmatic finance where a single application can cover a variety of projects. I believe that encouraging more use of those mechanisms could be really important in reducing the level of bureaucracy and application costs.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Friedman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Collins and Ranking Member Wilson. Los Angeles, which I represent, knows the importance of clean water and access to water very intimately. Every time we're in drought, every time we have an allocation in Los Angeles, our economy takes a hit, our green spaces are impacted, and everything from our ability to add the housing that we need to just people's everyday experience in the city is deeply impacted. I am very concerned about the proposed cuts to the EPA. Administrator Zeldin has stated that he intends to cut the EPA's budget by 65%, and this is a staggering amount to hit to an agency that's tasked with keeping our water clean and our air clean. A 65% budget cut would require major staffing reductions for key functions, including water and air monitoring, something that is very important right now in Los Angeles, particularly post-fire, when people are very worried about the safety just to send their kids to school or to drink water in their community. And as much as we all want to cut unnecessary regulations, the best way to keep cancer-causing PFAS out of our water, to keep chromium-6 from making parts of our aquifers undrinkable in California, is to have strong environmental protections so that polluters are not free to pollute our water and our air. Now in California, these programs have been really critical, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and WIFIA. Since 1989, more than $14.6 billion in financial assistance, with over 400 unique recipients across the state, have been dispersed across California. An example of one of these unique recipients was the Burbank Sanitary District in my district, which received a $1.8 million loan to repair and replace 14,000 linear feet of outdated sewer mains and laterals. The California State Water Board has co-funded 19 projects with WIFIA, which has delivered a combined $6.5 billion in low-interest loans to projects across the state. Now, the water departments in my district view the WIFIA programs as absolutely critical to their long-term financial health and for their water infrastructure projects. You know, we're a first world nation, and people expect our infrastructure to reflect that. Pasadena's Water and Power Department is currently planning to utilize WIFIA funding for projects that will help secure reliable and safe water for over 9,000 residents. And just to remind you, Pasadena was one of the cities that had awful losses due to fire recently. So this will help to secure clean water for Pasadena residents, and it'll also create about 1,400 local jobs, something else that is very important to my community. So I wanted to ask some of you some questions about these EPA cuts. So for Mr. Buckley, in 2016, EPA estimates that we're going to need $271 billion to meet federal water quality objectives. And in 2023, this number jumped to $625 billion over 20 years, just for safe drinking water. So despite that, this administration is still proposing a 65% budget cut. Can you speak to how a cut this extreme are going to impact these projects across the country and also in my district in Los Angeles?
Yeah, certainly. It comes down to what I mentioned earlier as far as a go, no-go on a project with a utility. Either they're going to have the money to spend for that repair on that project or they're not. It comes down to being that simple. Is the money there or not? The escalation in prices recently over the past 2 to 4 years, we've seen projects where the engineer's estimate for the job would be, let's just take an example, 40 million. But when the actual bids come in, it's 80 million. The prices are rising across the board. So with rising prices and then cuts in revenue, those are just kind of extreme opposites. It doesn't play well with with us to be able to get the resources and the tradesmen and the workers that we need to get a job done, nor does it help the utility owners to be able to finance and fund those jobs.
Now, these pipes often are underground. People don't always see them. Residents don't understand the importance. What happens if these projects don't get done? What kind of results can people see that have, like we have in my city, 100-year-old pipes underground?
We're seeing it now, Congresswoman. It's the useful life of our systems is done. We've been kicking the can down the road for too long. I'm a Washingtonian, born and raised here, Representative Norton. And we've been dealing with these issues here in the DC area for years. There just has to be improvements made. We also mentioned, somebody mentioned PFAS earlier. We're talking about new technologies or new issues that we're finding. All these budget issues that we're talking about now, this is just to maintain what we currently have, not even to address what's coming down the pike.
Right, so crucial for human health, and of course, the longer you wait to repair these pipes, all this system, the more expensive it gets. Thanks so much for the answers. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. LaMalfa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to panelists. You know, Ms. Friedman was talking about the importance of our water supply and to get into Southern Cal, and so some of the points I want to make here really underline that as well, as we have great opportunity to hold a lot more water in California that we're not doing presently. A couple angles of being able to build the Sites Reservoir, which WIFIA is going to play into that, as well as running the pumps a little more efficiently to fill up San Luis Reservoir. We're going to see allocations of 35% to farms in San Joaquin Valley unless things improve this year. 35% of, I don't know what normal is anymore. So, I mean, we got to do better on that. We should be filling San Luis Reservoir. We should be building Sites Reservoir and managing our water a little more smartly. You know, Lake Shasta up there has seen, since January 1, a tremendous amount of water just go down the stream and not be picked up somewhere else. And we're working on the numbers. I know off the top of my head, it's at least 800,000 acre feet. It might range as much as 2 million acre feet have flown by Lake Shasta on that Sacramento River CVP project. So I want to drill down more on the WIFIA loan process there, which is indeed a good one. It's been very helpful for a lot of projects. Chairman Hilaire was talking about the importance of local clean water projects and processing plants, and that plays into this as well with our Bay Delta, in that if more plants around the bay were putting out cleaner water, we wouldn't have nearly as much garbage, as bad water in the Bay Delta, which requires so much flushing of good water that could be going to ag and people. We're going to see 42 gallon per day rationing for some of our urban neighbors as the way things are going. So, Mr. Matishich, let me drill down on WIFIA with you here a little bit. The Sites Reservoir project located in my district, and I shared with Mr. Garamendi for a time till the lines changed. Appreciate all his strong help on that. Is a 1.5 million acre feet proposal that's grinding through the process here. It applied for a WIFIA was first invited to in 2021, and that application in 2022. And so it's still waiting EPA review and approval. So I'm grateful that at least it's in play, but we need to get moving on this. And WIFIA is very important because it is a low interest loan. The federal government doesn't lose out, it's paid back, but it also makes things much more affordable for a project, and actually in this case can lower the cost of the water itself the buyers will be using by about 10% just from not having high interest payments. So Sites is about a $4 billion project, and the WIFIA could amount to about $2 billion. So what I would ask Mr. Matishich was, should the EPA in this process, since we're a few years in now, provide more flexibility within the loan program to project, related to project schedule, flexibility, and the completion dates, so we can better accommodate large-scale projects in general? I know you're not versed on sites per se, but large-scale projects. What do you think we can do to make these timelines better and these costs when it takes multiple years to do so?
So, thank you for the question, Congressman. I think that the master agreement arrangement that WIFIA introduced a few years ago is actually ideally suited for the program and project that you're talking about. Actually, the very first WIFIA the loan that was closed under the master agreement was with the Hampton Roads Sanitation District in Virginia, and that was for more than $1 billion.
Was it very speedy?
I'm sorry?
Was it very speedy?
It actually worked through pretty efficiently, yeah. And they were able to structure it so that they could have separate tranches of loans, like 3 tranches of loans within a 12-year construction period. And so you can have a 10 or a 15-year construction period and have multiple loans within that are based on the actual construction period for the individual.
My time is getting short, but when you see costs continue to go up during that timeline and interest rates have jumped quite a bit, unfortunately, during this period of time that Sites has been waiting, how do we insulate ourselves from that? Should we have, there's a one-time reset of loan interest rates, for example, that are allowed. Do you see this, that these costs can come down sometime in the near future and keep products affordable?
Well, given all the uncertainties about escalation rates and interest rates, I've seen situations where the WIFIA underwriters and finance staff have encouraged the applicants to include significant contingency, and they welcome inclusion of a significant amount of contingency to cover some of those uncertainties, especially with regard to longer-term programs.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. My time's already up. Yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Garamendi for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Collins. I think I'm going to have an out-of-body experience here. We're going on and on here. Maybe we all fell down the rabbit hole and up is down and down is up, but I think there's something really, really important going on that we're pretty much ignoring. My colleague from Los Angeles, Ms. Freeman, mentioned it, but the reality is that the Trump administration is going to cut the EPA by 65%. And they've already made significant personnel cuts. And I'm going, how does that work? All that we're talking about here requires more money and more staff to process the various programs that we all want to have. So what are we doing? Why are we doing this? Why are we talking about, Mr. Boast and I proposing an amendment and also other amendments on the other side? We've heard from our colleagues on the Republican side. We're going to improve the WIFIA program. We're going to improve the CIFIA program. At the same time that the entire EPA and the Corps of Engineers are going to be facing massive personnel and budget cuts. How is this going to work? I suppose we're probably just going to continue plowing ahead and ignoring what is actually happening in real time as we sit here. Those cuts are happening. Mr. Musk is out there wheeling his chainsaw, slicing away at everything, including the EPA and the Corps of Engineers. Personnel cuts as well as budget cuts. Okay, I suppose I ought to join the parade here and forget about the reality of what is actually happening at this moment in this government. Significant reductions in the money available and in the personnel to process what I would like to see happening. Got two amendments I'd like to put into WIRDA. Well, okay, WIRDA sometime in the fall. Maybe we'll get it done by September. Don't know. To what purpose? There's no money. There's no staff at the EPA. The funding for the Corps of Engineers dramatically reduced by nearly $2 billion for programs such as this and dredging and on and on. We've got to get real here. All of this nicey legislation and improvements, of which two of them are mine with my Republican colleagues. And they're important, they're useful, they're helpful. But the underlying program is dramatically reduced. So let's get real here. We can fight a fight of really no purpose by amending the current laws, WIFIA, as well as the Corps of Engineers program. To what purpose? When the entire foundation of the program is being destroyed. It seems to me that our task and our time ought to be spent dealing with the here and now. And that's what the Trump administration is actually doing. Actually doing as we sit here. Dramatically reducing the funding, dramatically reducing the staff to process even less funding programs. If we fail to fight the fight on what is happening, what the Trump administration is actually doing, all of this nicey talk is to no purpose. Because it won't happen. It can't happen. There's no money, there's no staff. So my plea to all of us is we've got to deal with the here and now, which is the Trump administration eviscerating the ability of Americans in their communities, large and small, to address their critical needs. In this case, how are they going to deal with their sanitation systems? How are they going to deal with the clean water? And we haven't even begun to talk about the water programs themselves, so that that drinking water is safe and sound. We heard a little bit of that a moment ago from my colleague here. Yeah, I'm upset. You're damn right I'm upset, because what we've worked on for the last 50 years is being eviscerated. It is being terminated in many real ways for communities all across America. And here we are talking amendment here, amendment there, improvement, not dealing with the reality that the Trump administration is dramatically destroying the ability of American communities to have a clean water program or a clean drinking water program, and it goes on and on. My time is up. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Knott for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In brief response to what we just heard, you know, one reality that no one mentions is the fact that we have $37 trillion in debt. We have $37 trillion in debt, and our water infrastructure is crumbling. What have we received for $36 trillion? This is the first administration that recognizes the existential crisis that is $37 trillion of debt. And I am candidly astounded that there's not more outrage that every person in the United States does not have the cleanest water in the world after spending $37 trillion that we do not have. No one's talking about that. And, you know, my friends from New York and California, there's a lot of discussion that needs to be had here. But I was just in the state of Florida. They have half the budget that New York does. They spend far less per person than the state of California does. And their water is better across the board. No one talks about local regulations. No one talks about the costs on the ground. We candidly cannot afford just to throw dollars and dollars and dollars at every problem. We pay $1 trillion a year just in debt service, and that could very well rise exponentially. So, of course, clean water is a priority, but I think all of us should be outraged that we have spent $37 trillion for nothing. Not one word about that so far. But Mr. Walker, in that vein, let me ask you, sir, is there a federal program that places conditions on local regulatory environments in terms of how can we most effectively get dollars to these projects to bring about change, to bring about proper restoration, to bring about modern technologies? Because if you have the same project in, let's say, Tallahassee, Florida, and then a project in California, if the project in California is 5 times as expensive as the same project in Florida, are there any conditions in the federal financing program that would incentivize California to get their act together and lower the local regulatory costs?
I don't know how you monitor the states, but there is some levels in the federal government that are mandates that raise costs. I mean, there's like 6, 7 mandates that really don't add to the value of water. There's the green mandate, the fiscal sustainability, cost effectiveness, BABA, all those things that add to the cost to any project, sometimes 30, 40% to a project. So that means projects cannot get built. They should be. And somebody talked about the PFAS. That's just on top of everything else that's needed.
Right.
And it's unfair for the utilities that are treating the water now to have to, they didn't cause a problem, they're in perpetuity will have to treat that problem forever. And so that's going to add tremendously to their cost.
What's, in your experience, sir, what's the best way to bring down those costs? Because these are problems that need to be addressed, of course, but we have to have a fiscally conscious mindset when we're doing it.
I don't know how to bring down the costs, except to make them more affordable. And people have to understand they've got to pay for water and wastewater. It's not for free.
Right.
I mean, we pay more for our cell phone bills than we pay for our water bills. We pay more for streaming services than we pay for our water bills. You die in 3 days without water. You don't die without streaming services, but people think you do.
I'll just go down the line with the remainder of my time. If you could ask, in your estimation, what's the best way to most efficiently bring down the costs of these problems? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think, well, I appreciate the discussion as well. I think this is the discussion that needs to happen. And for us, as mentioned already, the direct funding and a lot of this investment, federal investment and state investment is what allows us to be able to build this water infrastructure and then make sure that it is at a cost-effective rate for the ones using it.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Knott, I think, mentioned me in his opening remarks. Would you yield me for 15 seconds?
Let me get these answers and then we can yield. Mr. Buckley, sorry.
Sure, bringing down costs will be cutting regulations. Red tape.
Yep.
That helps a great deal, without a doubt. But what I would like to see from this group is for somebody to pick up the lead, again, as I mentioned earlier, on private activity bonds. And let's bring private funding in here. If Congress isn't going to be able to provide funding, as our representative stated just a few minutes ago, then let's let private industry come in, just like transportation does. There's no reason water shouldn't be the same way.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I would add, I think making sure that there's a sound pre-construction process that looks at make sure that the cheapest and most cost-efficient alternative is actually the one that's being implemented can go a long way toward helping to reduce costs.
Yes, sir. Thank you all for your testimony. I wish I had more time. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Chairman yields. Gentleman yields. The chair recognizes Representative Figures for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. The $37 trillion is a problem. It's not just that this administration is the first administration to pay attention to the problem. This administration was part of the problem. This administration, the first time around, added more money to the national debt than the previous administration. And as we sit here now, if we were so concerned about the $37 trillion, we wouldn't be pushing forth a budget that's going to add an additional $2 trillion to the national deficit. An additional $2 trillion. And I am of the opinion that if we're going to go $2 trillion into debt, we shouldn't be doing it for the purpose of funding tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans. We should be doing it for vital purposes, for critical infrastructure, like ensuring that we have clean water delivery systems across this country. And so if we want to be serious about our national debt and deficits, let's have a serious conversation, but let's not pretend to do that. Let's not pretend to be making cuts at DOGE. Let's not pretend to be saving this nation money while at the same time pushing a budget that's going to add $2 trillion to the national deficit. And that ain't Democratic math. That is the budget math that the Republicans have produced. And meanwhile, the president is spending $3.5 million per trip to Mar-a-Lago. $3.5 million per trip it costs the American taxpayers when Donald Trump decides to go to Mar-a-Lago, and that is not including the money that my colleagues spend in going down there with him to have meetings that they could have in Washington, D.C. for free. I'd much rather spend $3.5 million down to clean water efforts in the state of Florida, or more particularly my state, the state of Alabama. Well, I represent a district where we have an individual median income of $32,000, a little bit lower than $32,000. Some of the poorest communities in this nation. 7 of the 15 poorest counties in the state of Alabama are located in my district. We have some of the poorest places in this nation in my district, and they all suffer from critical water infrastructure. Not they all, but many of them suffer from critical water infrastructure problems. And so with the balance of my time, I'd like to discuss ways that we can help those communities, because these are communities that don't have a significant tax base. They don't have significant cash reserves, but they have very significant infrastructure problems. Pritchard, Alabama, a city in Mobile County of less than 20,000 people, they lose an estimated 60% of their clean water from delivery to the time it gets to an end user. We have places that don't have traditional soil concentrations, and they can't even use septic tanks because the soil does not tolerate for it. So for those communities, with the balance of my time, if we can go down the line, what are the changes that we can make to better support those low-income communities, those poor places, those cities that don't have, abundant tax revenues to be able to meet some of the current requirements to receive some of the funding, but they still have the need for their critical infrastructure systems, particularly the water systems and sewage systems. Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Thank you, sir. So one of the things that can be done, and we've seen it in Texas, allow the states to fund more technical assistance. I mean, a lot of these communities, you've got the mayor is also this local businessman. You've got the city secretary, that's all they've got. So they don't know how to, and that's not their expertise. So states are really good at knowing where the issues are and help them, and with technical assistance, the EPA's got a big technical assistance program, but it's all these big national programs. It's funnel that money down to the states where they know where the problems are and they can help them at local communities.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It feels like we've been at a tipping point for quite some time with this issue, and I think that's why the bipartisan infrastructure laws is so important, that we work together and figure out a way to streamline some of these processes. Two things for us. We're busting at the seams in our own wastewater treatment plant at the Lummi Nation, and same goes for our home and a lot of people that can't afford this type of basic human right. And for us, it's more grant grant-based funding and or expand forgivable loan programs for tribes. Thank you.
So Congressman, you mentioned directly what can we do to help get the water funding addressed now. I would say like in the 118th Congress, over half of the SRF appropriations went to earmarks, leaving 39 states with less resources. Congress needs to reform the earmark process when it comes to water. I think that would help a great deal in redirecting funds directly towards water instead of earmark.
Congressman, I think that the efforts toward greater efficiency and directing programs through the top priorities that are identified for the SRF and WIFIA programs is an important way to make sure that the most critical projects do get implemented, and focusing on the criteria that is used to help identify the projects that get funded is can be used to make sure that the most important projects do get built.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chairman yields. Chair now recognizes Mr. Honor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all the witnesses for coming today. Mr. Buckley, I believe in response to a question from Representative Knott, you said that one of the things that we could do is to condition federal aid on removing red tape from water infrastructure projects. Could you expound on that a little bit?
Well, let's go all the way down the line. When we're constructing a project in construction, we have a dedicated person that has to track the financing and the billing and all that stuff just associated with SRF-funded jobs. So that's just on my part. Then you go up to the water utility managers, and how many people and personnel do they have that have to track and monitor and track all that funding? So I think it's just a tier step of number of personnel that have to follow through with the reporting and the red tape.
Right, thank you. Mr. Walker, you stated that, quote, you won't die without your cell phone or streaming service. Have you met my teenagers?
I have two just like that, so yes, sir, they think they do.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. In your written testimony on page 4, you wrote that congressional mandates on SRF loans increase the cost of clean water infrastructure, which are passed on to households in higher wastewater bills. This is a recurrent theme, I think, on this committee, that we make investments in infrastructure, or we try to, but then red tape, regulation, permitting and so on delays or increase the costs of those projects. And in your on the same page, you list some of these congressional mandates. Davis-Bacon, which some have called Jim Crow's last stand, but American Iron and Steel, water and energy certification, fiscal sustainability plan, engineering procurement, Buy America, Build America. Now, how can we remove some of this, these layers and layers and layers of congressional mandates that get in the way of meritorious projects?
Well, I would say that if Congress put them in, Congress can take them out. And it's kind of like, these are probably good ideas at the time.
Yeah.
But I mean, as a loan officer, I'm looking at fiscal sustainability. I don't need somebody else to tell me what that means.
Right.
And so, and these are a death by 1,000 bites. There's multiple ones.
Right. Yeah. No. I agree. And on the next page of your testimony, you point out, green certification. The Clean Water Act requires SRF borrowers to certify that they have selected the processes, materials, techniques, and technologies that maximize efficient use, water reuse, recapture, and conservation, energy conservation, and so on. And and then as you said, but this is the value of water and energy efficiency, you say, is firmly instilled across the water sector and will not be eroded if congressional mandate is sunset. Yeah, this is just part of what people people managing these projects do. They're not wasting water on purpose. They're not trying to use too much energy to drive up the cost of water or wastewater bills. So, you care to comment?
I agree. I mean, nobody is trying to build an inefficient project because it costs you much more in the long run than you save in the short run.
So why force the project managers to jump through and do more permits, more reports?
I wonder where the reports are going. Do y'all get those reports?
Yeah, I've never seen one. And it seems like everything the government does, this is the theme. I serve on the Education and Workforce Committee, and there we wonder why the expenditures on public education have done this, and educational attainment has gone down. And a lot of it, by the way, what goes along with costs is the number of non-teacher, non-principal bureaucrats. And that's to comply with federal mandates.
My wife was a teacher for 31 years, so she's well aware of all the reports she had to do. One of the reasons she decided to retire because it became more paperwork than teaching.
Well, right, and by the way, the salaries of teachers have gone up very modestly. The number of teachers has gone up about 8% over the last 20 years, student about 8%, administrators, non-principal administrators have gone up 88%. So that is where the money is going, and that's where our good teachers are going. They're leaving the profession because they're frustrated. And I fear that probably the same thing happens with some people getting frustrated trying to put together water projects. Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Honor. I was always taught at an early age the road to the poorhouse was paved with good intentions, which is a lot of those mandates that you're talking about. The chair now yields 5 minutes to Ms. Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Buckley, I am deeply concerned about cuts to federal funding for drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. What are the harms to public health and local economies of such cuts?
That's a great question. I don't think we have the time to go into all of them, Congresswoman. Directly, we're looking at 6 billion gallons of treated water being wasted every hour. As far as the local economy is concerned, fewer projects means fewer jobs for our employees, work that we have to go elsewhere to find outside of our communities. So the less there is for us to repair, I should say, the less funding there is that supports the work for us to repair, the less work there is for us to be able to get accomplished. So on an industrial basis, one thing that we keep forgetting about is our industries are utilizing more and more water on a daily basis. I mean, data centers are a perfect example. And with this region being the largest area of data centers, the amount of water that's used with data centers takes away from the water that's needed for drinking. Not that that's a bad thing, just another thing that we have to look at and keep in mind. So, did I answer your question? Or?
I think so. Mr. Hilaire, the proposed full-year continuing resolution being voted on later today cuts the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers construction projects by $1.4 billion with a B dollars. The Army Corps plays a crucial role in designing and constructing water resources development projects, often in partnership with project sponsors. What are the immediate and long-term implications of programs such as the Corps' Waterfront Infrastructure Financing Program if federal funding for the Army Corps is cut?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The implications for us at Lummi Nation, we have our own water and sewer district, our own water and sewer board, our own wastewater treatment plants serving 6,000 people on reservation, and just over half are Lummi members, and the other are non-Lummi members. So we serve everyone. And so the impacts come down to just the public health and safety of our residents on reservation, but also for our salmon and our shellfish beds, everything that we rely on as a people, our culture, and the sacredness of water as well, and as well as our economy. I don't know the facts of any of these potential cuts, but anything that cuts, any cuts that would impact our ability to practice our way of life is really important to us. Thank you.
Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman or lady yields back. And I next recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Hurd.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Chairman Collins and Ranking Member Wilson for holding this important hearing. In western and southern Colorado, small towns lack the in-house engineers and legal teams that they need to navigate complex federal compliance rules. As you mentioned in your testimony, Mr. Walker, a one-size-fits-all congressional mandate particularly burdens rural communities, and I'm concerned that some of these critical water infrastructure projects are not able to be completed because these communities simply can't afford to navigate the compliance process. Mr. Walker, some of these mandates you mentioned in your testimony do not apply equally across states. For example, I understand that Colorado is one of the states whose SRF must comply with the Fiscal Sustainability Asset Management Plan mandate. Can you discuss the asymmetrical application of some of these federal requirements and how they impact the effectiveness of SRF programs, and maybe provide some specific recommendations on reducing those barriers, whether by streamlining requirements or creating more flexible pathways for small rural communities?
The one that comes to mind is the engineering requirement that was put in about 2 or 3 years ago. Most states have engineering procurement requirements, but the federal government put a different one on there so that it's conflict with states sometimes now. And so it's really difficult for them. They may have an engineer that worked with them for 20 years, but now they can't use them anymore because of the federal mandate. So it's really causing problems within the states. So that's one of the things that's not across the board. It causes problems across the board for different states.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Walker. Mr. Buckley, as you know, other infrastructure projects are directly affected by water infrastructure. For example, water mains are commonly laid under roadways, which can cause disruptions when those waterways, those pipelines are in need of repairs. From a contractor's perspective, can you talk about what specific legislative or funding mechanisms could encourage states and localities to better align infrastructure projects and prevent those kinds of inefficiencies?
How about talking to each other? States and localities need to be talking to each other a little bit more. How that is addressed federally, I'm not quite sure.
Can you give an example of where that takes place and it's working effectively?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Can you give an example of where that talking is taking place and where those entities are communicating in a way that leads to more effective?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of utilities out there that actually have direct conversations on a regular basis with DOT. You're talking about roadway transportation and how repairing a certain part of an infrastructure is going to affect all the utilities that are in the ground. But then there are moratoriums that are put on when you can go back in and repair those utilities later on. So if a roadway comes through and is rehabilitated, it might take 5-10 years before the local jurisdiction allows that roadway to be torn up again. Now what's going on is those water lines are leaking, the sewer lines are leaking, the storms is eroding. So I think collaboration between those groups is imperative. But when it comes from the federal side, I'm not really sure how that would work.
Okay. Thank you for that. Mr. Walker, back to you. One frustration I've heard from rural water providers in my district is that federal funds tend to flow toward metro areas while small towns and rural communities get left behind. WIFIA loans are great for large-scale projects, but small communities often can't get access to the system. What changes to SRF and WIFIA funding could help ensure that rural water systems, not just large urban projects, get the financial support they need?
So for the record, over 55% of the number of loans the SRFs have done over the years go to small communities. So that's a really good thing. I don't think WIFIA is geared towards small communities. I think it's better to put more funding into the CAP grants where the states we're used to dealing with small communities instead of trying to change WIFIA to make it small communities.
So you see it as a feature, not a bug?
It's a feature. Like I said, it's only part of the funding too. So even they got more WIFIA funding, they still have to find other funding to match that. Okay. So I think it's better just get more money to the CAP grants instead of trying to make WIFIA fit the small communities.
Got it. Thank you very much, Mr. Walker, for that. Mr. Chairman, I yield the remainder of my time back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair next recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Burleson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Walker, in your testimony, you highlighted that the Clean Water State Revolving Fund achieves results because the programs are run by the state and not by the federal bureaucracy. Can you shed some light on how that's important and why that matters?
Because the states know what they need. We talk to those people. I know those people on the ground, and I know what they need. I know how we can work make a package that works for them instead of a mandate. I mean, EPA manages the WIFIA program. EPA is not a bank. So the states are the banks, and we know the programs, we know the projects. We've been dealing with the SRFs for 30 years, and so we know what's needed, how to run the programs, and be most efficient. In fact, the states are very frugal with their usage. 4% overhead is all they're charging on all these grants. It's pretty good compared to some of the things we've heard from other grantees and how much they charge overhead. So states are very frugal.
So would you agree with me that by the federal government giving this authority to the states to make the decisions, we're actually getting the best bang for a buck?
Absolutely. It's pretty efficient. If you look at the amount of grants that go to the states and how much they've leveraged that and delivered to the funds versus, small grants through EPA. It's a one-time deal. It doesn't revolve. Not as efficient.
And also, Mr. Walker, in your testimony, you said that the mandates, the congressional mandates on the Clean Water State Revolving Fund loans, no matter how well-intended, as it was mentioned, the road to hell, I believe is the reference I've heard, is paved on good intentions. But they increase the cost of clean water infrastructure, which can directly be applied to citizens and their utility bills. Can you provide an example of how our mandates have increased the costs that ultimately increase the costs for consumers?
Especially for small communities, they don't have the people to do the reporting, write the reports. They're relying on engineers to do that. And so they have to charge, those engineers have to charge for that. That adds to the cost of the whole fund, the whole project, but it doesn't add to the pipe in the ground. It takes away from the pipe needed in the ground or the treatment systems, things like that. These are costs that the engineers have to charge to do that don't go into fixing the system itself.
Mr. Buckley, in your testimony, you emphasize that the projects that your industry undertakes are not small endeavors, but ones that cost millions of dollars and require multiple layers of bureaucracies to have to coordinate. Can you expand on that, the difficulty it is to have to deal with the federal government, the state, the local government, whenever you're dealing with a project?
So a lot of it is, thank you. So a lot of that is flow down. So what is required at the top flows down to the person or the firm all the way at the bottom. So whether it's BABA or AIS, any of the requirements, whether it's someone mentioned Davis-Bacon, and all those add up into time and resources, and having someone handle, track it, follow, report it, and send that up. And that's on a monthly basis. That's nothing that just happens at the end of the job or at the beginning of the job. It's on a constant stream. So it's constant use of resources.
Also in your testimony, you highlight that when Congress creates earmarks, that it often diverts funds away from things that the state revolving fund believes is a core mission. And so they're being prioritized by whatever is politically popular. Can you expand on that impact?
It's a tough one. And
You may not wanna
I'll rely to some of my experts behind me to get some perfect examples. But realistically, it goes back to what Mr. Walker said earlier. The states, and in this level, the municipalities and the utilities, they know what's best for what they need. And when a project is not chosen because of another earmarked specific project that needs to be done, that project doesn't have the funding anymore. And that's earlier when I mentioned we're kicking the can down the road on our system, on our pipes, on our treatment plants. It's exactly what we're talking about. We're taking money away from a project that needs to be done and giving it to something that doesn't necessarily have to be done.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair next recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Babin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I want to thank all you witnesses for being here today and for your testimony. It's a pleasure to be back in this hearing room doing important work for the American people. I represent the 36th Congressional District in the state of Texas. Water infrastructure is very important to our folks, our industry, especially in East Texas. My district includes Houston all the way over to Louisiana. The projects funded under State Revolving Fund make genuine impacts in my local communities. Mr. Walker, appreciate you being here. There's been pressure, particularly during the Biden administration, for more federal control over water infrastructure financing programs. Do you feel that federal bureaucrats based in Washington, D.C. know more about Texas water needs than the local municipalities and Texas state government?
That's kind of a slam dunk, sir.
That's a
No, sir, they do
one-word
not.
answer.
I mean,
Yes, sir.
how many people in DC even know where Newton is or where Beaumont is? They may know where Beaumont is because where all the gas comes from.
Right.
But no, the people on the ground in Texas know what's needed in Texas.
Amen. Thank you very much. Beaumont's my hometown. It's where I grew up. I just had folks in my office just 5 minutes ago talking about water issues in Texas. And also, for the second question, there was a large-scale push by the Biden administration to institute grants for higher amounts of funding, essentially turning the loan program into a grants program. How has this affected the overall health of the Texas SRF?
It's decreased our value. It's decreased our ability to leverage. Like I said, I can take $50 million and turn it into $300 million, whereas it's a $50 million grant, that's a one-time deal. And it goes, and the cost of projects these days, it's don't go very far. I mean, Port Arthur is doing a huge wastewater treatment plant. It's more than $50 million. I mean, it would help them, but I can help them, plus I can help Beaumont, plus I can help everybody else in your district by being able to leverage that fund.
Yes, sir. And has this change made SRF funding more or less targeted to local needs?
Less targeted?
Yes. Specifically for the individual needs of that geographical area, Beaumont, Newton, whatever.
I don't necessarily make targeted, but I mean, with the congressional earmarks, the average earmark in Texas is about $2 million. That doesn't go very far anywhere, and they got to find the rest of that. So taking the $2 million away from my SRFs that I could leverage to $50 million is what's really hurt the SRFs.
Okay, thank you. And then Mr. Matidich, Mr. Matidich, yes, sir. In your testimony, you noted that more than 60% of agreements awarded through the Clean Water SRF program have gone to communities with 10,000 people or less. And so I'm not going to ask you this, but I'm going to ask Mr. Walker, can you discuss the benefits and challenges smaller communities experience when accessing financing through Clean Water SRF and WIFIA programs, particularly in states like Texas? I'm asking you, Mr. Walker. Yes, sir.
Sorry.
Thank you for your testimony, though.
No, small communities do have a hard time accessing. That's why we have a technical assistance program in Texas to help these communities get to where they need to be. Unfortunately, a lot of communities, they know grants are available, or if they are, they'll let things go until they don't do it, and then it becomes even more expensive. So it's kind of a dichotomy of problems. If you give too many grants out, they get used to those, and they don't want to pay the price of what they really need to do.
Right.
It's a challenge.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for your service to our state. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. The chair would next recognize the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Westerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I also want to thank Chairman Collins for having a hearing on this important issue. The Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, or WIFIA, and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund are especially important to rural districts like mine. Across rural America, water infrastructure is aging far beyond its useful life, and large areas with sparse populations leave communities with few solutions that are financially viable. Funding through WIFIA and the Clean Water SRF program provide these communities with much-needed solutions. When we find them, I think we should support programs like these revolving funds that provide a critical need for communities and create a continuous cycle of investment, and again, especially in our more underserved communities. So with all that being said, Mr. Walker, you talked about the value of that these programs provide to rural communities. This isn't necessarily an issue that grabs headlines, but I see the quality of life issues that come with underperforming wastewater systems. Can you talk about those quality of life issues and tell us some ways you've seen these programs solve those for communities?
I mean, for a small community, if you don't have water, you're not going to get economic development. People are going to move away, just destroy the community. Arkansas has done a really good job. The Central Arkansas Water and Wastewater District has done a good job of regionalizing and using the SRF funds to do this, to reach out to these small communities, because it's a lot cheaper for one person or one operator to serve 4 or 5 than it is for each person to have their own operator. So regionalization is really beneficial, especially for small communities and rural communities, and the SRFs are a way to regionalize and take the burden off some of these small communities.
When you say regionalized, how large of areas have you seen, quote, regionalized, and do they always interconnect the water systems, or is it just a management regionalization?
I've seen both. There's a big one in Florida. It's more of a management regionalization, and it works very well, government utility. But also seen like in Central Arkansas where they reach out and actually take in the communities. Also in North Carolina, they've done the same thing. They reach out and taking these small communities that were small and rural, and now they're having a lot of growth. They're not ready for that. And so running a wastewater and water system is not as easy as it used to be. With all the different regulations, all the chemicals, all the requirements, it's very difficult for small communities to run water and wastewater systems now.
And I know a lot of these, when I think of the small communities in my district, they've been dealing with a lot of these wastewater issues for years. And really the Clean Water SRF is one of the only viable solutions that these communities have. Do you think there's ways we can improve that and maybe leverage it more in the future? Because I think you're correct on the regionalization. Some of these communities, even if you built this, if you paid for the capital cost up front and they didn't have to amortize that over their water rates over a period of time, some of these communities still may not be able to generate enough income just to pay for the ongoing maintenance.
No, it is a challenge. I think one of the ways we can help leverage that is to help these communities get where they need to be in Texas. I mean, I've worked with some communities, they come into us for a project, and we may have to work with them for 2 years to get them where they need to be. You know, sometimes they think we can't afford it. And then you go work with them and say, well, here's your bill, here's what you're spending on operations and maintenance. If you do this project, that O&M cost will come down. And that's something they don't really can do by themselves. So allowing the states more money and more time to work with these communities to get them to where they need to be, and maybe even funding some of those technical assistance programs at the state level will go a long way to reaching these small communities and getting the systems they need.
All right, thank you very much. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Well, thank you. Are there further questions from any members of the subcommittee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I would like to thank all of the witnesses who came here to testify. It was very enlightening testimony. The subcommittee stands adjourned.